the Team Performance Podcast with Spencer Horn and Christian Napier. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Team Performance Winning Ways for Uncertain Times podcast. I'm Christian Napier, and I am joined by the very casual, very sporty brains of the operation, Spencer Horn. Spencer, how are you?
I am doing fantastic, Christian. Yeah, I'm sporty casual. I'm headed out for a run in the mountains after our conversation today.
Run in the mountains.
Yeah.
A little bit smoky out there. It's been a little smoky. Any issues with the smoke, or is it okay?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I mean, it's in my house or out there, and I got to keep my heart in good health, and it bothers my eyes a little bit, but I don't know if you're noticing it. Kind of your eyes get a little irritated.
Yeah, I've noticed it. My wife and I go for walks in the morning, and the sky is a very interesting look. Sometimes it's really pretty if the sun is just about to break over the mountains and you get these heavenly rays dispersing through the atmosphere. It's really, really pretty, but not the healthiest of air. But
no.
Okay.
Still gigafires going in California. It's just really, really upsetting and sad. But we got to keep moving forward. I'm not a firefighter, so other than being careful with the resources that I have when I go out, my wife and I are actually going camping up in the mountains this weekend.
You are? Whereabouts are you going?
I think we're going to go up to the Uintas.
Oh, that sounds amazing. It might be chilly up there.
It will be. So I'm prepared for that. We're gonna tent camp, but I think I'm going to get. I have a kerosene heater. I'm going to get that all set up. We've got warm sleeping bags and stuff, but we've got this new Dutch oven that we're going to use, and it has you can make pizza in it. You can turn it upside down. It has like a grill and a flat side. It has it's almost like a wok with a little flatter. And we're really excited. So we've got our menu all planned out, and one of the nights we're gonna make pizza, and then for one meal we're gonna catch fish and make a stir fry.
Oh, that sounds awesome! Pizza in a Dutch oven.
Yeah,
that sounds really, really intriguing. You have to let me know how that is, because my mouth is already watering. It's only 8 o'clock in the morning here. We're talking about pizza, and maybe it's a little bit early, but I have to say, it sounds really, really delicious.
I'll send some pictures. Yeah, we just got this new Dutch oven at Orson Gigi. I don't know if you've heard of that, but those of you outside of Utah, it's a great place to go find kitchen paraphernalia and all kinds of cooking things. It was, they have lots of high end, but this is just a regular Lodge, which is a brand that makes these cast iron Dutch ovens.
Yeah, we have some Lodge cast iron skillets, and we love them. I have a Dutch oven that I got from the Salt Lake 2002 Olympic Winter Games. So it's all got the logo of the Salt Lake 2002 Games.
Cool.
But I've never used it because I don't want to ruin it, because I'm thinking, well, it's this cool Dutch oven. So I've had this Dutch oven for, 18 plus years. I've never used it.
Come on, you need to use it. What's the point?
Well,
who's enjoying it?
My attic is enjoying it quite
right?
Yeah, that's the problem. Oh, well.
We love Dutch ovens, so we'll do a Mountain Man hash breakfast. We'll cook in our Dutch ovens every time. We just did a family reunion up by Flaming Gorge. I think I told you about that, but
right.
we did a ton of Dutch oven cooking. We have 2 others that we've used for years and years, and they're amazing. They're fun. The kids just love them. The food is fun, and there's ways to make them easier. Now they have like tinfoil linings and paper linings to make it very easy to care for.
So it's a lot easier to clean up.
That's correct.
All right. Well, until we go camping, I guess we ought to maybe focus on the task at hand now.
Let's do.
A couple of weeks ago, I guess it was a little bit more than a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago, we had a conversation about analyzing troubleshooting, fixing performance problems, team performance problems in an organization. And we got partway through the Robert Mager, Peter Pipe flowchart, but the discussion was so awesome that we never made it all the way through the flowchart. Actually, I don't think we even made it a third of the way through the flowchart.
I think we got to number 4 out of how many?
I don't know how many there are, but yeah, we've got a ways to go. We talked about fast fixes last time, setting expectations, providing feedback, maybe fixing a process if you can in a very simple way, or provide the resources or tools that are needed. But now we come up to a big point, and that's managing the consequences. So I'm going to share my screen here so we can see where we stopped and where we're going to be going today. Let me do that here quickly. All right. Okay. You see that?
I do. Yes.
Okay, great. Let me zoom in on this a little bit here. So this is the diagram. This is the process flow that we went through. We started at the top, figured out how we would define a problem, determine whether it was worth solving, and then some of the fast fixes that we could use to solve the problem. And in some of those fixes, as we talked about last time, Spencer, people might need a little bit of help understanding how they can do this better, how they can manage expectations better, how they can provide feedback in a more effective way so that they don't inadvertently adversely impact their organization. And that's an area where you can really help them. And this is another area we're going to talk about today where I think you can provide a huge amount of help. And that's really managing the consequences. So are the consequences appropriate? Are we rewarding positive behavior? Are we punishing positive behavior? Are we promoting negative behavior? Are there any consequences at all for any kind of behavior? I'm really eager to dive into this with you, Spencer, because I know you got a lot of experience in this area.
Yeah, I mean, this is, for those of you who are listening, we don't script this. This is just coming off the cuff here, and I think consequences are something that is a challenge for most leaders and managers, and it's not managed well a lot of the time. And just to start the conversation off, there are people that really struggle to give positive feedback, right? They're uncomfortable actually receiving accolades. And so, my wife and I just had a conversation about this the other day, and she couched it in the terms of love language. And for me, one of the love languages is recognition, is appreciation. I mean, I enjoy that. Not everybody does that. She doesn't, right? But because she doesn't, it's not easy for her to give, because she doesn't. It's superfluous. It's a waste. It's just not necessary. We should just do things and for the intrinsic good of doing them. And so, and that there's not a problem with that perspective. It's just a different perspective. So many managers, based on their behavioral profile, struggle letting people know when they do a good job. And if you have someone that is highly extroverted, they're not getting consequences for doing the good job. We have to reward people for doing the things that we want them to do. Some people have the attitude, well, that's what I pay you for. You just get to do that. I'm not going to reward you any further by recognizing you for just doing your job. That should be reward enough. What do you think about that? That's so we're going to, there's lots we get to talk about, but I'm just talking about positive consequences.
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember doing work in the Middle East, and we were having some issues in preparing for a major event that was going to be held there. We had a lot of expats, so people that weren't from the country, they were out of country coming in, a lot of Westerners coming in to do the work. And the organizing committee leadership which was local, wasn't really providing them the support that they needed in order to do their job. And so the people got a little frustrated. And when those frustrations were raised to the leadership, they asked the question, which is the exact same question you just asked, which, well, I'm paying them, so why are they complaining? They get paid well. I don't understand. Why are they not happy? We're paying them. And they didn't realize that it's not just the compensation that can determine one's happiness or lack of happiness, satisfaction in a job. There are many other elements at play. And I'm wondering, Spencer, in your experience, what you have seen with the clients that you've been working with, or in your own personal experience as a leader, where you felt like positive consequences or positive behavior wasn't being rewarded.
Well, I think that happens a lot. I mean, I know it happens a lot. I talk it every day about, I just talked about a moment ago how some people want a pat on the back. Another positive consequence is not necessarily public recognition, but private confirmation that you're on the right track. Even though I'm paying you well, there are some people that have such a pride in their craftsmanship or their work that they want to make sure that they're providing exactly what you want. And so they're wanting to deliver at a high level just because they have anxiety of not meeting expectations or being wrong or not doing the right things. And so silence in this area can be interpreted as I'm doing something wrong or I'm not being appreciated. And so in the absence of information, what will happen a lot of times with my clients is they start making up a story in their mind about, well, my boss doesn't care about me, or they create, just in the absence of information, they create their own reality of what's happening and why they're not being communicated with, or why the information is that they're doing the right job or the right things is not being shared with them. And that creates all kinds of problems. And you start having then communication that's not effective. They go talking to someone else, like, I'm not hearing from them, or they must be, they must be poor managers, or they must not like me, or and not only that, but they must not be effective, or they're incompetent. And so now you start having destructive conversation about members of your team that aren't based in reality. And that's just from not having communication and letting people know how they're doing. So a reward for good behavior and effort, if you don't take the time to talk to your people, it can actually backfire. They can be dissatisfied and leave. So there are actually consequences of not rewarding people for doing a good job. And I'm not talking about monetary rewards, Christian. I'm just talking about recognition. And recognition can be public or it can be private. And that will be very different based on the person that you are leading and managing. And you need to know the difference. How do they like to be recognized? And how do they like to be told that they're doing a good job? And what's not helpful, Christian, is, hey, great job, pat on the back, Christian. You did a good job with that, with that project. What did you do well? Here's where you were succeeding. I like to give feedback in a very simple way. Here's what you did well, and here's where you could do a little bit better, right? So a consequence for a good job could just be recognizing what people did well so that they will do that again and again. And I think that's the first level discussion.
Yeah, I'm going to give you an example and this is a silly example, and it's not necessarily a professional example, but in church, I was called to be the stake employment specialist. So this is a long time ago. This is probably, 15 Yeah, more than 15 years ago.
Oh, good. So anybody listening wouldn't know who it is.
Yeah. And I'm not saying this to be critical of anyone who was involved in the organization at that time. But when I was called, I felt like, this is something I need to take seriously and I need to do a good job. And so I went to all of the meetings and everything. And I worked very closely with the employment specialists that were in the individual congregational units, which we call wards. And so I worked with them to see if their local congregations had any needs and what we could do to help them. At the end of each month, I put together a pretty detailed report, and I would put this report in the inbox of the presidency of the stake. I did this for 6 months, and I never heard anything from the stake, and they never met with me or anything, and it's okay. And then after about 6 months, I was having a conversation with one of them, and I happened to mention these reports. And he said, "Oh, I've seen those reports there, but I've never looked at them." So I thought, well, I guess I don't need to be doing these reports anymore. So I stopped. And that's okay. It's not something that they explicitly asked for. It was just something that I was doing to help give them some visibility on what was going on in the stake, in our area, in the area of unemployment, and they just never looked. And so
you were giving effort. In other words, you were creating, a product or a report, going the extra mile to help the leaders make good decisions.
Yeah, and so and I don't begrudge them because they have a lot on their plate, and right. So it's not something that's meant to. I don't mean to put anyone in a bad light or a critical light. It wasn't something that they asked for. It wasn't something they expected. So they didn't really view it as a priority. I thought myself that I was doing something that might be helpful to give them some more information about what's going on in the stake when it comes to unemployment. But they didn't see it that way. And after 6 months, I realized it wasn't important to them. So it must not be important to me. So I stopped. And I wonder how often that happens in organizations and workplaces where people come up with something that they might think is innovative or important, and they do a lot of work on it and they elevate it and they just don't get any feedback at all. Yeah. And then you realize, oh, well, I guess the management doesn't care. So I'm going to move on. I wonder if I should stop this sharing so we can see you talking. I think I'm going to do that.
No, whatever you want. I think that's a great example of how we create engagement, and that what happened in the church also happens in our organizations when we don't recognize someone. And it costs nothing other than a conversation, and we need to be having conversations, as we have discussed over and over again on this podcast, because we need to be able to have those human connections with our team. And what a great way to do it when there's a consequence for good behavior. We want them to do more. And if it's something that's not necessary, let them know, right? You know what? Hey, so appreciate the report, but that's not necessary. You can just report to us on a quarterly basis at such and such a meeting. On the other hand, wow, that really makes things easy. I could just take a glance at that and see, hey, we've got a problem. And that's made my life so much easier. Thank you for that. Keep doing that if that's not too much of a problem. So grateful for you, Christian, for putting that report together. I mean, that took 10 seconds, right?
Oh, yeah. 10 seconds. Now, I've got a question for you, Spencer, when it comes to this. We've been talking about this so far at an individual level, a kind of one-on-one, making a connection.
Yes.
That is incredibly important. What about the macro level in an organization? Are there certain policies or processes that should be put in place to help manage consequences appropriately in an organization with your team?
That's a great question. And, just because we're talking off the cuff, I mean, I think one of those is just how you manage your core values. If at a macro level, if you do not make decisions in alignment with what you say is important to your organization, you will create all kinds of negative consequences. I'll give you one example of an organization that most of us have heard of here in the United States called Southwest Airlines, right? One of their values is humor, right? I mean, they believe in humor and having a fun environment for their employees and by extension, some of their customers. They want to create a good place. And they're a company that they receive hundreds of resumes every day. You know, when they have an opening at Southwest, there'll be thousands of resumes just for that over a period of time. But every day they receive just unbelievable amounts of resumes. And so they're able to, and they created that's a consequence of them living in alignment with their values, creating a culture where people want to be, and they're attracting people in alignment with those core values that have that fun spirit, that have that giving nature, right? And so what happened was they hired an IT director. You think, well, we've got to have somebody that's got great IT skills. Well, of course, that's a prerequisite, right? But they looked at the track record, the resume of this individual was stellar. And so they hired him. And, you know, people welcome this new guy. I was so glad to have you here at Southwest. Isn't it great? You know, what a great place to work. And and after I think first or second day, the VP of HR went to this HR director, this IT director, and said, you know, how's it going so far? And he says, you know what? It's really frustrating. I can't get any work done. Everybody stops and talks to me. And it's just, you know, I really need to be able, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. They fired him the next day. And the reason is because this individual did not fit with the culture that they were creating. And if the word ever got out that they're in an environment that doesn't live in alignment with who they say they are, they won't have thousands of resumes for every open job. People aren't fighting to get into that company anymore because they don't live what they say on their values. They're not. There's not congruence. And a consequence of you having your core values on the wall, let's say their integrity, right, and you don't make decisions that are integrous, people are going to start to recognize that you're not who you say you are. And so they're not going to live, you know, they're not going to care. They're going to stop creating the report, like you just said. And so that's a consequence at a macro level of not living in alignment with policy or values that are stated in an organization.
I love that example, Spencer. In the flowchart, after you get through the consequences, there's a whole section on skills. And one of the questions in the skills area is, does the person have the potential to change? If you held a gun to their head, I know that's a really terrible metaphor, could they actually do what you want them to do? And if the answer is no, then you got to replace the person. And it took Southwest less than a day to figure that out. You know what? This guy's he's not going to fit. And so let's go ahead and cut our losses.
You know, you can really have both, right? You can have someone that fits with your culture and what you want. But so often companies are under pressure when they have to hire, right? Because, you know, there's an opening. So everyone is, I remember talking to an editor for a magazine out of Missouri, and they were shorthanded. You know, they had lost an editor or something like that. And so they hadn't replaced that editor for a year. And this one editor that I was talking about was considering quitting because they had just so much of a burden. Whenever we lose somebody in our team, everybody else has to fill in the gap, right? And so they're working, you know, longer and for the same reward. And so it's hard when you have to fill that gap. And sometimes we just we gotta fill it as quickly as possible. But if you're not careful about making a decision that's going to have long-term effects or consequences, then you know, you're going to have a situation like this that's adverse. But Southwest is a great example of them recognizing that they quickly made this decision and they've got to find the right person. And maybe there's just not time to reform everybody on your roster. Right now, I'm somebody who believes that people can change. but they have to want to change, Christian. And sometimes with your organization, you have to decide, is it, is everybody else's well-being worth risking while we reform this one individual? I mean, I had that situation at a company that I ran. I made the mistake of actually keeping an individual and part of it was out of fear. So here's another consequence of bad behavior, right? This was a person that was disruptive to our culture, but was a top sales producer. And at the time, during the last recession, capital was a premium, and we thought this person's sales. And we actually moved him out of the office at a time when we were normally in the office. It was let's get him remote. Right now, most people are working remote. So we said, if we could get him out of the office, then maybe he won't have such a toxic influence on the organization. And I really tried to work with this individual and save them. They'd been with the company for years and years and years. Good person at heart. But I think that there was an overall negative impact on the entire culture. My initiatives were undermined by this individual. And if I had to do it again, I would have gotten rid of him much faster. That's actually a consequence of not making tough decisions sooner, like Southwest did. I experienced, and I actually had left that company because my initiatives, my strategies weren't successful while I was there. They're successful and they're being implemented now that I'm gone. But at the time, that toxic individual was a big roadblock.
Well, I think you've given us a pretty good example of a situation where negative behavior receives some kind of positive reward, right. and
no negative consequences.
yeah, and no negative consequences, and that's a challenge in organizations to deal with. And we are all familiar with people in organizations who seem to brown nose their way up, or they're very good at talking themselves out of situations or making excuses that upper management buys, and they're okay with it. And you look at them and like, how are they getting rewarded for not performing? But they find ways to do it. And I'm just curious, in your experience working with organizations, how can you help them so that they can identify these gaps between the consequences and the performance? Because I seem to see it everywhere I go. I see organizations, sometimes they can be very political, and if people are very political by nature, then they seem to thrive in those kinds of organizations, even though they may not be necessarily contributing positively to the overall profitability or performance of the organization. I mean, what do you do in those kinds of situations to help people align the consequences to performance?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. I think first of all, they have to realize that there's a problem, that this is actually a whole podcast I'd like to talk about. I use a tool. It's called a team diagnostic, and you can do it on the whole organization. You can do it on a intact team. And I think, I have worked with lots of teams, and one of the ways I've helped them very quickly is to diagnose the gap that you're talking about. And you can have, this diagnosis uses a model. Okay. So it uses a model of measuring how productive the team is and how sustainable their productivity is, which is the culture, right? And let's call that positivity. That's what Daniel Goleman calls positivity, right? That's the emotional intelligence quotient. He says, the fundamental task of leadership is to create a positive reservoir of emotion where people want to go that extra mile, give you those reports that maybe didn't ask for, right? That's what allows the sustainable activity and productivity. So we measure 7 elements of productivity and 7 elements of positivity. And we can get a very clear picture with several graphs on how they're doing. And let's say that they have predominantly an organization that is highly productive, but low positive. This is a meritocracy, right? We're just all about the grind. Well, that's not sustainable because people will eventually burn out. There's lots of competition, right? There's looking over your shoulder. It's there's not a lot of collaboration. It's, I got to get my numbers. And there's actually a time in every organization where it's appropriate to be in that quadrant, right? For example, the end of the month, you've got to finish all the reports. You've been in accounting, right? Sometimes you got times of the year, you got public accountants and CPAs that certain times of the year, they're working a lot of hours. That's the grind. It's just all about productivity. But you can't sustain that all year. And an organization that lives in that quadrant will burn out. But maybe you have a project-driven deadline that everyone has to get all in on, but then somehow the pressure valve has to be released. Well, a lot of executives fear the opposite of that, where you have high positivity but low productivity. And that's a problem too, Christian, right? Because it's not sustainable. We love to be together. There's camaraderie. We have fun. But we're not willing to challenge each other. We're really not willing to go the extra mile. Again, not sustainable. Of course, the worst is low. If you have low productivity, low positivity, you're out of business very, very quickly. So we want to get to high. It's hard to get there, but we figure out where the team is now. And what's nice about it, Christian, is it gets everybody's perspective. And when you reveal the data to everyone and not just one person's opinion saying, well, I think that the team is this or that or the other, we get a range of what's the highest in terms of productivity and where are we the lowest. And we can really start to focus on what are the behaviors that are holding our productivity back and focus on those and begin to close that gap. And we can look at what part of our positivity, maybe we don't do conflict well, or maybe we have a lack of trust right now that's going on, or we have, in productivity, we have decision-making problems. We're not effective at making decisions. We're poor at communication. Whatever those things are, we can identify and work on them and begin to close that gap very, very quickly. And doing it with a team is better than doing it with just one individual. Listen, I'm an executive coach, but I'm also a certified team performance coach. And when you focus on the entire team, you can get behavior to change very, very quickly, because you can't have people doing he said, she said, or operating in isolation. You get to address the problems as a team so that people can, it's like right now as a country, right? We have a problem, and you and I have talked about this with some of our guests about racism in our country. We have some people that are saying it's not a problem, get over it, and other people are just saying, no, it's a problem, we can't. But we're in two separate camps. We have red states and blue states. There's got to be a way to get people in the same room talking about it so that we can move forward more effectively. And that's what this process does.
Well, when it comes to these consequences, and what you just drafting off what you just said there, which was very important, Spencer, it's the notion of fairness. I think people in organizations want to feel like they've been treated fairly, and right. And so
acknowledged. They want to acknowledge that there's a problem, right? Just like some of us in our country right now want to acknowledge that there's been unfairness. That's exactly what you're talking about.
That's right. So when it comes to organizations, coming back to the compensation thing, we've talked a lot about non-compensation related items that can help people manage consequences. They're very important. Compensation is something that may be more visible in an organization, and people use it as a measuring stick. And there are ways that people might feel like they are being treated unfairly from a compensation perspective. What are some of the issues that you've seen with organizations that have implemented certain compensation and benefit schemes that end up inadvertently promoting unfairness and causing issues in organizations?
Christian, you're putting me on the spot here, man. How am I supposed to remember all this stuff? I just happened to have an example from a conversation I had Friday. But it's hard for me without, I can't think of, I know it's happening all the time. I just had a conversation with a CPA in Manhattan. She's originally from Moscow. So she worked in the firm's Moscow office. And 4 years ago, she moved to the United States. But, the Moscow office had 150 people. And the office here in New York has 2,500 people. So, large CPA firm. And they have other offices around the world. But so, talk about consequences. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm coaching this executive to be more effective. And she says, Here in the United States, I have to work so much harder to get noticed, right? In my small office of 150 people, you do a good job, you get noticed. Here, I don't get any feedback. And so I've been working with her to how to get feedback from her partner, one of the partners that she reports to, and what she needs from that partner for her to feel more engaged and effective. But this whole issue of fairness of pay came up on Friday, and she asked me how to handle that, because we're not. She goes, we're not supposed to know what other people make, but people talk, and word got out. And we have a pay structure that is geared in part to, obviously, how hard we work with our clients, how many hours of billable hours that we have, but also we're measured on how much outside activity we do, networking and being on boards and memberships and associations and being visible in the community. And she says, I'm doing all that stuff. And there happens to be another executive that is making quite a bit more than me and doesn't do any of that. And what's happening with this particular executive is that she's putting a lot of energy into the fact that she's not being treated fairly, and not focusing on it's hurting her emotionally. It's hurting her. Is there something wrong with me? Am I not? Do they not like me? Am I not good enough? Or, does this mean I'm not going to have the same chance for promotion and growth that am I going to be stuck? I mean, remember I told you about this, we make up the story in the absence of information. These are all the stories that are going through her head. And so we're working on how she can manage that and stay effective and focus on what she can control. But this is an example of a negative consequence that we make by unfairly applying or not following our standards and processes, the same for everybody.
It's really interesting. That's a great example. I'm coming back to this example that you gave your wife. She has a certain love language and you have a certain love language. And I remember back in the 90s when I was working for IBM, I don't know what they do these days, but back then they did have a realization that not everybody wants to do the management thing in order to make a lot of money. And you don't have to be management to be valuable to an organization. And so they actually created two different tracks for people. There was a management track, which you could progress up and your pay level would increase as you went up that ladder, but you didn't have to climb the corporate ladder to make a really, really good income, because they also had kind of an expert track where, if you wanted to be involved in research and development, or, you were a really, really good consultant in the field, but you didn't really want to be a manager. There were ways. If you were a fantastic IT architect, for example, there were ways, they had these dual tracks where you had this management track and this expert track. And so people with different personalities could find ways in the organization to still make a decent amount of money, good compensation, and be rewarded for their behavior without feeling pressured. Like, well, if I want to achieve a certain income level, the only way for me to do that is to become part of management. And so to me, that was a good example of structurally, are there ways that we can do things where we can reward people for the value they bring to the organization and recognize their love language? I want to be in the lab doing research, and I can be very, very well compensated for doing that without having to become the manager of product development.
That requires that you actually know your people and have conversations with them regularly. When we did the pro scan, the behavioral assessment with you, I don't know if you remember, on section 4, there's a motivation section that has 2 pages. And the first page is a list of things that are potentially motivating to you. And one is just like overriding needs. And some of it is money. Some of it is, just freedom and flexibility. But if you could sit down and have that conversation with somebody and say, hey, listen, tell me what your top four are. What is it that you absolutely need? You can then keep that in mind instead of, he's the best or she's the best IT infrastructure. What did you just call architecture manager? Then, well, because they're doing such a good job, we have an opening. Let's promote that person. So many times organizations promote a person that then they fail because the skills that it takes to be an effective manager are different than it is to be a brilliant technician. And so then they don't do a great job. We let them go and we lose them to the organization. If we actually knew their motivation and say, I just want to be in this world and be excellent at it so I can go home and play with my kids or do whatever else I want to do. Making a space for that is, I think, appropriate and productive.
And I've also found in organizations, particularly in this event space, with large events that involve public funding, that compensation structures, which are then, because the organizations are relying on public funds, they have to follow public employment rules, and the people in effect become public employees. And so they have to follow those pay structures. And oftentimes the organizers are not able to find or hire the talent that they want because they are constrained by these compensation structures. And these compensation structures are designed to help organizations minimize their costs by paying a lower amount of money for a salary than might be the market rate. In the end, they end up losing money because they don't have the right talent. Their hands are tied behind their back, and they can't hire the people who are really experienced, who could actually save them a lot of money because they know things, but they don't have the ability to go out and hire them because their compensation structures are rigid and they cannot find a good fit. And this is a big problem in the international event space where people rely on public funds. I don't know what the solution is, but I have seen it time and time again where you've got committees who end up losing tens or hundreds of millions of dollars because the decisions that are being made and implemented are made by inexperienced people. If they would have spent a little bit more money to hire the right people, they probably could have saved tens of hundreds of millions of dollars.
This is a consequence that happens. I just talked with another local CPA who works for one of the cities here on the Wasatch Front as their accountant. They have a vendor that they're coming up for a contract renewal, and the policy is to just go with the lowest bid. And he was telling me, they had three proposals to their RFP, their request for proposal, right? And they went with the lowest bidder who doesn't have the best capabilities. They're actually over their head to do the work. And so they're not going to get the best work for the cheapest money. And so in the long run, that may cost them more. That's another consequence. You just made me think of one other thing, and I know we're running out of time. We've only talked about, there's so much more to talk about just this issue, but one consequence that happens for some organizations is maybe they can't pay somebody more. This is happening with an organization. I was just coaching an executive director yesterday, and they have really begun changing their culture for the positive, but they've had to undo some of the decisions they've made in the past. So, for example, they couldn't give somebody a raise. This is a nonprofit, right? So, a similar issue to a public organization. They can't always pay people what they're worth, and so what they want to do is give them other benefits, like, for example, a seat at the executive table, right? So invite them into the meeting. Well, pretty soon you've got an executive meeting with 12 people in it, and it's really hard to get things done or be productive when you have all these different perspectives, and we want to hear them, but the meeting becomes like the floor of the Congress, right? you really don't get a lot of done. People are just, you don't get a lot of inquiry. You get a lot of pontification, right? Here's what I think we ought to do, but there's no time to really digest and dissect what people are proposing, because everybody wants to promote their idea on the Senate or Congress floor, right? And so what's that?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, continue.
So the consequence is that management process becomes inefficient, because we want to give people a seat at the table to make them feel more important. There's other ways to recognize them and let them know that they're important, rather than just, say, hey, we're gonna instead of giving you a promotion, we're gonna make you feel like you're an executive. There's just so many consequences that we create by not understand. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Hopefully my story speaks for itself.
It does speak for itself. I know in this event space, in the Olympic space, this is a constant issue. You've got 50 some odd different functional areas, which can roughly equate to departments in an organizing committee. All of them want visibility to the executive. Why do they want this? Because the executive, generally speaking, holds the decision-making power. So these people, in order for them to feel like they have the authority and the budget, the money that you said, to do what they want to do, they feel they have to be close to the executive. And as you say, it's
undue burden on that executive if he allows it or she allows it.
That's right. So they've got to find ways to actually delegate authority and a bit of autonomy to entities that don't report directly to the president of the company or the CEO, so that they feel like they are contributing and that they have some freedom to do the things that they know that need to be done,
right?
And not have to run to mama or papa every time they need a big decision made. And it's a huge challenge. So I really appreciate bringing them up. You mentioned that we're running out of time, and we are, because we both have commitments that we've got to run off and take care of. And
Christian, next time, one of the things we got to talk about is how to handle poor behavior. What are the consequences that we're avoiding with bad behavior? We gave a couple of examples of not addressing them, but how do we address them? How do we begin to shift that and create consequences that have positive outcomes to get the results that we want? I think that'd be a good thing for us to talk about next time.
I think it's a fantastic idea. And Spencer, you've given us so much knowledge here. You talked about this team diagnostic. I'm sure listeners want to learn more about this and other ways that you could potentially help them. What's the best way for them to find out more, how you might be able to help them individually and help their teams?
Yeah, I mean, if you actually want to get a demo of this diagnostic, I can give you what's called a team leader view version. So it's not a true diagnostic, but it's from your position as a leader to take a look at your organization. So you'll go through the assessment, see what it's like, and go from your perspective. And then if you choose to then open that up to a true team diagnostic, we can do that. But I can provide that. If you want to have that, reach out to me, Spencer at Altium Leadership. That's ALTIUM leadership.com. Email me, go to my website, altiumleadership.com. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn and social media. I'd love to chat with you. And Christian, with all of your great experience here, how do people find you?
Well, they can go to my website, gp4.com. That's gpfour.com. You can email me at cnapier@gp4.com, or you can reach me on LinkedIn as well. I'm very visible there. Spencer, it was a joy as always to talk with you, to learn from you. Listeners, please like and subscribe to our little podcast. We appreciate it, and we'll talk with you again soon.
Thank you, Christian. Great to be with you.